Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. Rangers, campers, hunters, and woods people, what are some of your creepy experiences that you cannot explain? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.
I work at a campsite, which I won't name for safety reasons. There was a group of kids for a school trip, normal enough, and one night I was checking cabins, making sure no one was up. I checked one and thought I saw something. It was scary shit. It was a boy's cabin, and I saw a female character, short, long hair, wearing a green dress, and I decided to walk in. I stepped foot in the cabin and she disappears. I don't know what the hell it was, but it didn't like me. I don't think. That's the last time I check alone. A friend of mine went off-roading with his buddies after smoking a whole bag of weed. They were driving through the woods in Lada, not giving an F, about the speed limit, and throwing fireworks everywhere. At the exit of the forest, the forester, I don't know the difference, was waiting for them, thinking they were hunting, and he searched everybody and the whole car for rifles or animals. He found a whole box of fireworks instead, and 5 people high to the bone wanting to get out of there ASAP. One time I was in the woods with my friends. We were about 8 or 9 and we just were walking around. We heard some noises from time to time, so we thought, hey, it's just the woods. So one day I'm in there and only one of my friends, and we were playing in a tree, and then we hear footsteps. So I ask my friend, is that your dog? And he says, no, she's at the vet. So we got scared and we looked down and there's this guy. We tried to stay quiet, and the next day we found out that this was the neighbor's kid, and he has autism, apparently. My friend and I went frog hunting one night in a canoe. We spotted one on the bank, but as we got closer, we heard something crawl up a tree. Nothing to be alarmed about, a raccoon most likely. It's perched on a branch looking at us. It's making a noise that sounds like a laser beam from a 60s Godzilla movie, while bobbing its head at us. The sounds seemed to come from everywhere. It definitely wasn't a raccoon. They don't make any noise like what we heard as far as I know. We did not take that frog. Back in summer 2016, I and a few friends decided to go camping in the middle of nowhere in Sweden, about 10 kilometers north of Akexberga. We set up 2 big tents and got a fire going since it was almost 7 p.m. by the time we got there. We were up until 11 p.m. drinking beer and smoking the reefer when we heard footsteps. We looked for the cause of them, but found nothing. My friends thought we were hearing things due to the fact that we were drunk as hell. The next morning, we found a dead deer that was ripped to shreds less than 20 meters from the site. We packed up and left ASAP, and we've never gone camping since. I don't work in the forest or anything, but my mom and I grew up in a very, very small Acadian community in rural New Brunswick, Canada. Outside of Moncton, the settlement is Notre Dame. That was mostly woods. Anyway, if you didn't know, cougars, pumas, mountain lions, aka eastern cougars, are extinct in my area of eastern Canada, but many people in my community could beg to differ. Most of these are not my experiences, but they're all true. Anyway, first was my mom. When she was a teenager, she was getting out of the car and going to the house at night when she heard an extremely loud cat roar, growl sound. It was much louder than any bobcat, lynx, cat, and so on, and she saw a very large black cat shape move in the dark. This was probably in the 80s or 90s. Next is my aunt. She lives about 5 minutes away. Her house was very wooded. Anyway, she has seen a tan cougar larger than any feline in the Maritimes. When she went out, she found the paw prints and took a picture. They were not bear, lynx, bobcat, or any of that shit. 100% cougar. She saw it again a second time. This was within my lifetime. I'm 17, born in 2002. I was around 10. Third was my next door neighbor. It was dusk, and she was outside, and she saw across the road there's a vastly wooded area with an extremely steep hill that leads to the river. Along the road, she saw a black panther. Not a bear or anything, definitely that. She had seen it twice or so. This was within my lifetime as well. I probably was a baby when it happened, though. Last that I know of was my cousin. My parents, brothers, cousins, uncles, and I lived with my nan at one point. And while it was just my uncle, cousin, and nan, my little cousin, who was around 12, was outside taking her chihuahua out to do her business. And she heard the same growl my mom did, like the cougars you hear in movies. And she saw a tan cougar in the long grass behind her house. She freaked out and ran inside. My experience was that I was playing around the river and found large animal bones and extremely cat-like paw prints in the sand and dirt along the river. Another of mine was my friend, and I got the woods connected to the trail, either right before winter or right after. We heard those big cat growls and saw a tan body in the bushes. We then ended up in a neighbor's yard in the next town over, St. Antoine, after we made it out of the dense and large woods. The craziest part? My nan had a news article from back in the day that a circus train crashed in the area and there were animals on it. Want to know which ones? Cougars. I think a black one and a tan one. The majority of the animals, especially the cougars, were survivors and were never searched for, as it was most likely too much of a hassle. My theory is that the black cougar that escaped, perhaps, bred with any cougars in the area. The last sighting I heard was my cousin's. That's the end. Thanks.
I mean, I don't think it's ridiculous to hypothesize that if there was a circus train crash and some animals were released into the wild, there could have been a small population, as those cats typically like to be very reclusive. Maybe there was some mating and the population wasn't as extinct as the locals thought. I mean, the paw prints track, so yeah, I think it's cool.
I grew up in a small town in Nova Scotia, which was founded in the mid-1700s, has a very small population, and is surrounded by woods next to the ocean. All three of my scary wood stories happened there, despite me moving 3 times, both also in the woods. Once, when I was in my teens, I was walking paths through the woods with a friend. These paths are on the grounds of where my old asylum used to be. The asylum was named the Poor's Farm and was established in 1887. While we were walking, we noticed there was an opening in a very little gap between the long grass and the tree line. We had the urge to go down it and see if maybe there would be a view of the ocean. We got to the end and just started walking through the woods when we came across some very old wooden crosses in the ground. No path leading to it, just a random opening we happened to find. We both got a really uneasy feeling, and I felt someone was watching me, though it was probably just my paranoia. So we turned around and left. We always knew there were people buried from the asylum, but assumed they were all in the cemetery you see when you first enter the paths. The second was around the same area. Years before that. I was about 12, 22 now. My best friend and I would go biking just about every day, and I always went to this spot we called the Rocks. Just a big weird black rock formation on the water. To get to the rocks, you had to go on a path behind the old playground. The path forked off in a lot of places, and a few times we would take a wrong turn, but always ended up around the same spot. One day, when we took one of the very small wrong turns, we came across what looked like a small cemetery with 2 or 3 tombstones. We were too afraid to take a closer look, so we just kept going down the path, which after a few minutes of going through the woods, opened up to a view of the ocean. As we came through the opening, we both stopped dead in our tracks. There was a man, I'm bad with distances, and this was 10 plus years ago, maybe 100 meters in front of us. He was staring right at us, as if he knew we were going to be coming. And we were wearing a top hat and fancy suit with the long back flaps, that could only be described as clothing from the early 1900s. Without a word, we both turned around and took off running, dragging our bikes along with us. Couldn't ride them through the paths due to tree roots everywhere. When we finally reached the playground, we both collapsed and were all, "Did you see that?" Basically sat there in hysteria for a while. I've always tried to brush this off as two preteens riding off each other's imaginations and over-exaggerating the whole thing. But to this day, it still gives me the chills thinking about it, and the fact we both saw the same thing. The third was more recent years, probably around 18 years old. I and some friends decided to try MDMA at the house of the same friend from the last story. We decided to go for a walk and meet up with her cousin. There was a group of like 4 of us, all girls. We were coming down a street with no houses besides one at the very end. As we got close to it, I looked up and suddenly something on the front porch moved. I and one of my friends both stopped, which caused the others to as well, and I asked if she had seen it too, to which she replied yes. Of course, thanks to the drugs we had taken, the thing took many different forms in my mind before I realized what it actually was. It turned its head, and we all at the same time whispered something along the lines of, "It's a huge cat." One of my friends starts screaming to call the cops, to which we all object. What's a cop going to do after a 15-minute drive to us? Not to mention, we were high as kites. We all stand there contemplating what to do with this big cat looking at us. It crouches down like how a house cat would before attacking. I tell my friend we need to back up slowly until we get around the bend and then run. We do this, and as we're running, I start throwing up from the fear while running as fast as I can and collapse in someone's lawn. The lawn happened to have kids' baseballs lying around, and my friend picked them up, ready to fight the creature that never came. We got picked up and spent the whole night trying to figure out what kind of cat it could be, since we don't usually have big cats around here. I think we settled on a lynx, though honestly, to this day, I'm not completely sure that's what it was. Most of our friends don't even believe us. A few years ago, I was on a boat with my grandparents up in northern Georgian Bay. I woke up in the middle of the night to a thunderstorm. I grabbed my light and headed up from the cabin to go sit it up top, because I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep with all of the thunder. But Grandpa was already sitting up top when I arrived. So I sat down beside him, and we both just kind of listened to the storm in silence for a while. And then we noticed something strange. There was a light coming from one of the islands, like a flashlight sort of pointed toward our boat. Now, it could have been campers, but there was no boat on our side of the island. There was no way to get onto the island from the other sides, as it was too steep on the other side of the island. And it wasn't other boaters, as it was around 4 a.m., and we were the only people anchored in the bay. The light stayed fixed on us for a few minutes before flickering out as though the light had run out of batteries, and we didn't see anything like it again. Needless to say, both I and my grandpa were both rather unnerved. I was working for a vegetation management company in western Washington and was surveying rivers during the salmon run to check on the local Dolly Varden trout breeding grounds. I was filming underwater with a really shitty camera, and I swear I saw some long dark shadow or enormous river eel disappear under large woody debris, easily 2 feet or longer in length. I've seen eels, but never that big. I hated staying in the water after that, but had to finish the job. It definitely freaked me out when I'm already skeptical of deep water. So I live in northern Minnesota, have my entire life. I grew up in a house about an hour away from Itasca State Park. If anyone is familiar with the area, it's pretty heavily wooded and gets extremely cold during the winter here. I now live farther north, but I digress. One year, we were having a bonfire. My brother and mom were outside with me, about to turn in for the night. We had pretty dense woods around our house, about 30 yards away on either side. We heard some branches snapping and rustling in the woods close to the edge. We get kind of freaked out after making noise, and it didn't stop. and we ran up to the porch. My mom was on the top step by the door, and my brother and I were on the ground. We turned around looking for the source of the noise. Well, something weird happened. We heard what sounded like a bull huffing and a loud growl, and then a huge crashing noise. Whatever it was broke a dead tree. We tried tipping and breaking it several times. This thing was solid. My brother and I showed my mom out of the way and sprinted inside. She still brings it up how we left her to die. My dad said it was a bear, but I've never heard a bear move through brush so loud. And I've never heard a black bear make that noise. It was Bigfoot. Changed my mind. I was in my 20s and about to backpack overseas for a while, so my best bud and I decided to have a little farewell camping trip. We lived in Flagstaff, Arizona, and she told me about this free creekside camping spot she found. It ended up being just right next to this abandoned New Age retreat where a lot of people died in their sweat lodge, but shockingly that has nothing to do with what happened, just added creepiness, I guess. We drive up to the site, and of the 6 slightly spaced out camping sites, they're all occupied. One site had a tent set up but no car around it, which in retrospect was possibly a red flag, seeing as this area wasn't a walkable place where you just cruise around on foot. It was off of a highway. Anyway, we were already there, and it's evening time, so we decided to just make our own little site in between the no car camp and the one further down. We were only in one small tent with 2 small dogs and figured we didn't take up much space anyways. As we were unwinding, we start having some drinks, bad idea, and make a little fire to cook hot dogs on. I can't help but take notice at the campsite without the car, just distant enough to now see a man in his early 40s behaving strangely. He looks over at us a lot. At one point, he's just standing still in the middle of the creek, staring at something for long periods, taking his tent down, putting it back up, clanking pans together. Behavior very similar to someone who's high on meth or dealing with some sort of mental illness. I start getting this really bad feeling. As it becomes totally dark, we're by the fire when I hear someone approach us. It's the guy. My parents' pug was with us. He's incredibly friendly to everyone, and at this moment he hid under my car, something I've never seen him do. The man begins talking to us, and my completely non-street smart friend invites him to sit down by the fire with us. I know, what on earth was she thinking? As he began talking to us, I almost immediately knew he was out of whack, and he described the endless gold pyramids that were located across the creek, and the gold skulls, and just weird shit. He mentioned how his sister got a boyfriend in Oregon, kicked him out, and he was now homeless. He then mentioned in this really uncomfortable tone that he saw us 2 beautiful girls and couldn't stop wondering what we were up to. That was when I immediately noped and abruptly told him, okay, well, you can head back to your camp now. Have a great night, in which he got up and walked back over. I immediately told my friend, who was still so oblivious, that we were unsafe. We had 2 options. Risk getting a DUI, leave our stuff behind and get somewhere safe, or get her boyfriend here ASAP. She called her boyfriend, and he agreed to drive straight to us, 45 minutes. During the 45 minutes waiting for him, which felt like an eternity, I clutched my knife, and his weird behavior continued, pacing nonstop, clanking rocks together, jumping into the creek, and screaming at something to get away from him. Total delusional, manic behavior. Her boyfriend finally arrived, but the fun didn't stop. Boyfriend had Oregon license plates, which is relevant. With having some relief of an extra person with us, we tried to relax and have a somewhat decent farewell camp trip until the guy came back again, but this time his tone was completely different. When the boyfriend introduced himself, the scary guy wouldn't shake his hand. He had this "you encroached on my property" type of vibe. He left and then wandered back 2 separate times, each time with some weird delusion. The first time, he was going on about that the boyfriend stole his cigarettes and mentioned his car and Oregon, and then I started piecing together that somehow in his delusion, he was beginning to think that the boyfriend was the guy that kicked him out in Oregon. We tried to de-escalate and decided to go to bed, hoping he would just forget about us and do the same, as if people on meth go to sleep, lol. Anyway, my friend and her boyfriend passed out immediately, and I proceeded to lay awake the entire night clutching my knife. He paced around our tent multiple times that night. At one point, just as a horror film begins, I saw his shadow against the wall of the tent by the moon. You know, just fun things you see moments before you die. He rummaged through our stuff at one point and drank all our beer. Somehow we survived the night, and I could no longer hear him as the sun was rising. We got the heck out of there as early as we could. About a year later I went back, with a group of people to the same camp area, and just around where we camped that one time was an abandoned tent just in a pile, a bottle of holy water, a crystal, and a book about horse training jotted with pages of notes and ramblings. Maybe this place was haunted. Heck, I don't know. But I'm glad he didn't murder us.